Hi everyone, it's Iram. Today we are creating this soft watercolor poinsettia card using the Winterberry Poinsettias 3D embossing folder. I'll show you an easy, beginner-friendly approach that lets you build color one petal at a time. Stay tuned. I'll be using the Winterberry Poinsettias 3D embossing folder, and I've already embossed a panel. The way I want to create my card is by having the image along the bottom edge. I have used A2 cold press watercolor cardstock. The watercoloring I'll share today is going to be super easy. Anyone can do this. It's not going to be daunting or overwhelming. I'm not going to apply water over the entire image like I usually do. We'll start with one petal, then the next, then the next. I want you to color right along with me. For this flower, I'm thinking of combining a little bit of Quinacridone Magenta from the Artist Watercolor Tubes with a little bit of Toluidine red. I may also mix a touch of permanent yellow deep to mute the color slightly, and if needed, I'll deepen it with a little bit of Payne's Gray. I'm using new Altenew brushes from the foundation brush set. Take your pigment and apply it to the base of the petal. Then use a clean brush to activate the pigment. Oh my god, my brush was dirty. That's fine, completely fine. That's my brush. Yours should be nice and clean. Simply activate the pigment and spread it outward. That's all you're going to do. Using a clean brush with clean water to pull the color toward the tip of the petal. That's it. Stop there. We'll come back to it later. Now I'm applying the pigment to this petal. Since it's tucked underneath the first petal, it should be slightly darker. So I can add a little more pigment here. Then I'll take my clean brush, or not so clean brush in my case, and pull that pigment toward the tip of the petal. That's it. By now, your first petal should have dried. You can go back in and, if you'd like, add a little more pigment to deepen the color. Then use your clean brush to soften and blend it. I'm going to mix a little bit more color. I'm taking the red watercolor, adding the pink, then a little bit of the warm yellow. You don't have to add the yellow if you don't want to. I'll also place a little bit of Payne's Gray off to the side and mix in a little bit of it just to deepen the color because I think the mixture is quite vibrant. Now we'll repeat the same process and add another layer of color by applying pigment just as we did on the first layer. This is how you'll watercolor each of the petals by building layer over layer of color. If you want deeper shadows, simply wait for the first layer to dry before adding another layer of color. The intensity depends on how much pigment you apply. It's much easier to build color gradually by layering after the first layer has dried than it is to start with a highly concentrated mixture and try to control it from the beginning. If a petal is wet, you can skip the adjacent petal and color another petal. I'll simply apply pigment at the base, repeating the same process again. All of the petals will be colored in exactly the same way. Use a clean brush with little water to fill the pigment toward the tip of each petal. If you'd like to step up the coloring, you can always add a little more pigment for extra shading. You can also add a bit of stippling by gently dabbing your brush to create texture. If you don't like the little white lines, you can certainly go back and cover them, but don't worry too much about them right now because we'll come back later with a darker pigment to add definition, and that will create so much depth and dimension in the floral image. Because this area is still wet, some of the texture will naturally soften. On the sections that have dried, the texture will remain visible. If it's too strong, simply use a damp brush to soften it. These little tips make a huge difference in your watercoloring. Now that this flower is finished, I'm going to add some definition using a little Van Dyke brown. I think it's the perfect color to add a bit of depth. I'll first apply color, then soften it using a slightly damp brush. For the flower center, I'll start with a little water and a very muted yellow. Next, I'll add burnt sienna in a C shape to create dimension and give the flower center more depth. That's it. The berries are going to be two-toned. I'll begin with a watery yellow. I'm intentionally keeping it diluted because I want to add green while the yellow is still wet. The green will naturally bloom into the yellow without me having to blend it manually, creating a beautiful shaded effect. These two-tone berries will help balance the yellow and green throughout the panel. Now let's color the leaves. I know I accidentally colored the leaves red earlier, but that's okay. I'll color this one green. I'm using olive green and applying the pigment near the base. Then I'll use the clean water to activate the pigment and pull it through the leaf. That's it. Again, if you'd like to add stippling for texture, you absolutely can. Now let's add a very soft green background. Start by mixing a very diluted green and begin applying it from bottom upward. This creates a beautifully diffused background. If you want a darker background, simply increase the concentration of your green. This gives me a nice deeper base near the bottom. I'll also add a little to the top. For this, I'll rotate my panel. I'll continue watercoloring this section carefully. Once I reach the open areas, I'll soften everything with clean water to achieve that diffused look. I'm adding a little more water here because it will help blending much easier once I reach that area. This section is a little trickier because of the stems. I'm simply going to paint right over them, and that's completely fine. They'll become slightly soft and blurry, which I actually like. If you prefer crisp stems, simply let the background dry first, then paint the stems again afterward. Whenever you want to add details, your watercolor must be completely dry first. That applies to flowers, leaves, or any area where you want sharper definition. You'll notice a little yellow over here too, blooming from the berries, and that's completely fine. It adds a lovely warmth to the card. Now that my panel is almost finished, I am going to add a little water here to soften the pigment so that I don't add with harsh watercolor marks. Personally, I don't mind them, but I know many people do. To keep this area from looking awkward, I'm adding a little texture by gently dabbing my brush. As I mentioned before, if you want texture and details to show, always let your first layer dry before adding them. I'm going to pull a little of that yellow outward because I love watching the paint bloom. If that's not something you enjoy, feel free to skip that step. As you can see, the stems are still visible and I'm happy with that. I'll let this dry for a few moments. Meanwhile, I'll mix a little more of the same green, not any darker, just the same concentration. And then I begin adding a little texture. That way, even if you end up with a few little blooms or splotches, they'll look intentional and become part of the design. I'm just adding small dabs of watercolor, concentrating them near the images and around the edges. This leaves a nice highlight in the center where you can place your sentiment. Now that the panel has dried, I'm going to add some splatters. These are nice diluted splatters, and it's perfectly fine if a few land on the flowers. I'll use a tissue to soften some of them. Next, I'll add a few white splatters using titanium white gouache. These also help disguise any little imperfections. Although I personally think those imperfections are simply part of the watercoloring process. Finally, I'll add a few fine black splatters using carbon black gouache. I love adding splatters because they create beautiful texture. To finish, I emboss the panel one more time, and I absolutely love how it turned out. This is such a simple and approachable way to watercolor your embossed panels. And that's the finished card. By working one petal at a time and building the color in light layers, watercoloring becomes much more approachable and hopefully a lot less intimidating. I hope today's video encourages you to pull out your watercolors and give this technique a try. Thank you so much for spending some creative time with me today. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.